Welcome to the second in our series of videos looking at the origins and development of the early Cold War, the conflict between the superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union. In this video we're going to be looking at the development of the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. Now both of these were US initiatives. They were the brainchild of Harry S. Truman, President of the United States, and of his Secretary of State George C. Marshall. The Truman Doctrine represented a dramatic change in US foreign policy. Prior to the Second World War, the US had been committed to a policy of isolationism. That was a traditional stance whereby the US kept itself apart from international affairs, did not get involved in conflicts overseas. Obviously that was broken with the US's involvement in the Second World War, but immediately after the war, the US seemed at first to retreat to its traditional isolationist stance. That changed, and changed dramatically, in 1947, when Truman announced that the US had a moral obligation to support free peoples around the world who were looking for defense against tyranny or against oppression from the outside. And by that he very clearly meant the threat of expansionist communism. Communism promoted by the Soviet Union, spreading in particular in Europe and in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. The first place in which the Truman Doctrine was put to the test was in Greece. Greece was part of a Southern European sphere of influence which had traditionally been dominated by Great Britain. Now, after the Second World War, Great Britain, unlike the United States, was a much poorer country. It was a country that was crippled by debt, much of it owed to the United States. It was a country that could no longer effectively exercise great power status in the way that it had for the century prior to the Second World War. In announcing the Truman Doctrine, President Truman effectively agreed the United States would not only abandon its own isolationist position, but step into the breach created by the decline of Great Britain. The impact of the Truman Doctrine, which very directly committed the United States to providing support and, if necessary, military support to support independent states in Europe, was that the Greek government defeated communism. But more profoundly, the United States was committed now to defending Europe against communist aggression or communist expansion for the foreseeable future, and Great Britain had accepted that its role as a great power was behind it. The Truman Doctrine was followed very quickly by the Marshall Plan. George Marshall, Truman's Secretary of State, toured Europe and gained a first-hand understanding of the extreme poverty and crisis that was taking place in Western Europe. Large swathes of Western Europe, not just Germany and France, but other countries also, had been devastated by the effects of war. Buildings destroyed, whole cities laid waste, the industrial capacity of Western Europe dramatically reduced. Marshall launched something called the European Recovery Programme, and under the ERP, the United States agreed to spend $13 billion to rebuild Europe, and it did so principally for three main reasons. It did so out of a humanitarian concern for the people of Western Europe. It also did so to resist the spread of communism. And finally, it did so because it knew that an economically vibrant Western Europe would become an attractive export market for US goods. Stalin reacted badly to the Marshall Plan. He saw it as a tool of Western imperialism. He forced the Soviet satellite states in Eastern Europe to reject Marshall aid. He rejected Marshall aid on behalf of the Soviet Union itself. And the conflict between these two forces, these two superpowers, was brought to a new level, heightened to a new degree, as a result of what the Soviet Union saw as Western encroachment at the very borders of what's still regarded as its sphere of influence.